The Iran war does seem to be raising the profile of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, raising a bunch of questions about whether President Trump could champion Rubio over his own vice president, who President Trump said yesterday was, quote, less enthusiastic about the decision to go to war with Iran. Joining me now is NBC senior national politics reporter Matt Dixon. Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
What does it tell you that the president is basically polling a room at a fundraiser just hours after these strikes started against Iran about how he views this 2028 choice?
Well, first, it's hard to ignore the timing, right? I mean, we're now at war with Iran, and this is what was on the president's mind. So it's clearly important to him. But he's, still the apprentice president, right? I think he likes a bit of tension, the "you're fired." I think we have seen a history of him throughout his 2 terms in office where a little staff tension is something that he likes. So Marco Rubio is clearly having a moment. He's Secretary of State. He's the foreign policy guy. And I think that's going to naturally elevate him a bit. J.D. Vance leads in most of the polling. So there is definitely a horse race dynamic that's starting to shape up.
What does it tell you about perhaps the divide in the MAGA base when it comes to these 2 potential candidates?
I think it's important moving forward that we define the MAGA base, right? There's a shrinking part of the Republican Party that identifies as that MAGA base. I think among those true believers, President Trump's base, President Trump's sort of core supporters, they're going to go with whoever he says they should go with. But I think from some degree, Marco Rubio is a very good political talent, been in public life his entire career. That there's going to be a real conversation to be had there about MAGA folks who are going to do what Trump says versus Republicans who maybe have a different view of things.
And it's still really early. A lot could change. But looking at our latest NBC News poll, that showed that 90% of those self-identified MAGA Republicans do support U.S. military action against Iran. So does that mean that would translate? Would those numbers potentially change if it's Rubio urging intervention? How might that shift it?
I think, and we've done some reporting on this as well, I think the length of what happens in Iran, how many service members potentially die, unfortunately, is going to do a lot to shape that. If it's quick or in or out, that I think is going to be a significantly different thing than if this goes on for months or whatever the duration might be.
And we've seen a little bit less of the vice president maybe than we normally would. Mm-hmm. What is his team saying about that?
I think the general perception is that Vice President Vance isn't as supportive of the operation, the war in Iran as President Trump is. And I think there's some intentionality to the idea. He disappeared on social media for a few days, which is much different than is normal for him.
Well, and the president seems like he will tell us what he thinks once he makes a decision, right, about whether he will endorse his Secretary of State or his Vice President.
He always
Matt
does.
Dixon, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.